So apparently the new Space Marine Command Squad has 4 wounds and comes with a damage 3 heavy bolter. Salamanders have a +1 to wound stratagem and a way to get devastating wound flamers, and jump intercessors are unusually cheap, coming in at under 100 points. Let's talk about some interesting rules leaks and rumours for the new Space Marine Codex. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today I thought we'd talk through a few more Space Marine Codex leaks, some really interesting stuff supposedly coming out in Games Workshop's upcoming book. Should be an interesting shake-up to the Astartes, and really quite interesting that we're getting more flavoured rules that might help represent other chapters like say Salamanders, Imperial Fists and Iron Hands again, rather than everyone just playing Gladius. With the pre-orders going live on Saturday, often more info tends to come out nearer to the time, although we have been getting a few leaks over the past couple of weeks or so on Discord. Again, these ones supposedly come from the same source as the last ones, again coming in the form of text leaks, but at least fairly well described ones. And while you should always take those sort of leaks with a grain of salt, I suspect that these ones probably will be accurate, given that everything that the source said has basically been kind of consistent with what Games Workshop previewed so far. My guess is that the rules will probably be right, and probably take the points cost with a pinch of salt, particularly if Games Workshop decides to do some sort of digital update to the Munitorum Field Manual for Codex Space Marines coming out. I feel like that does seem kind of plausible based on one of the leaks around the Desolation squad today. Apparently the points cost in the Codex will be the same as the one that they originally had when they were first released in the Index, something I'd be kind of surprised to see reversed and maintained, given they've gone up from 120 points to 200. For the interesting stuff today though, we've got some details out of the Company Heroes datasheet, a few more details for the first company and the Salamanders Firestorm detachment, a couple of new stratagems and an enhancement each, and supposedly news that the new Jump Intercessors are going to be absolutely remarkably cheap, coming in at under 100 points and significantly less than the Assault Squad is now. Starting out, there were some pretty interesting details for the Company Heroes, supposedly 95 points for a squad of 4 of them, and apparently they will be a squad of 4, not a squad of 5. It sounds like the Space Marine Captain will have the option of being fielded separately, in a similar sort of way to how the rules for the Firstborn Command Squad works at the moment. The thing that surprised me the most about their stat lines were that apparently each of these Company Heroes will have 4 wounds, everything from the Veteran Sergeant to the Heavy Bolter guy, to the Champion and Banner. I guess that's not remarkably different from the Firstborn Command Squad, which had 3 wounds apiece, but compared with your rank and file Space Marines, these guys seem like they're going to be extra hard to kill, particularly when they're clocking in at slightly under 25 points per model, and they've got a debuff to the enemy wound roll. Otherwise fairly standard Space Marine stats on their stat lines, a 3+ save with no invulnerable, objective control 1, though if the banner's still alive then it gets to give you an extra +1 objective control, the same as the Ancients do at the moment. Consistent with what Games Workshop previously teased, apparently they'll have a -1 to wound if they've got an attached character in the unit. I guess that's to help encourage them actually be in their own battlefield role and actually have an attached character as opposed to run around solo. And overall, at least for the standard Marines, that will make for a fairly tanky unit, 16 wounds at toughness 4 with a -1 to wound. Not too bad for less than 100 points. Though I suppose to access that you do have to pay for an expensive character, which might make them just feel a bit more run-of-the-mill durability wise. Then otherwise we basically know the gear of the squad as per the model previews, but apparently that heavy bolter that one of them's wielding is a master crafted one, and that will basically be the same sort of rules but get damage 3. And the other veteran with the bolt rifle and the bionic arm, his bolt is a special 1 and gets damage 2, whereas the one carried by the Ancient is only damage 1. The Primaris Company Champion is supposedly going to be unchanged in damage, 5 attacks at strength 5, AP -2 and damage 2, that will be the same as he is at the moment, and his attacks all get precision as well, so they could be quite nice for sniping enemy characters. There's no mention of the Champion giving the unit any other special rules though, so not sure that the other ones on his datasheet will be drawn over to this or not. Overall, I feel like the individual model stats do seem kind of interesting, but I can't help but think that you're going to build a sort of slightly weird mixed role unit here. Say if you added a Primaris Captain to the unit, currently for 80 points, you'd have a unit that's 175 points in total. But for that fairly massive points cost, I still feel like you could probably get a unit that just doesn't really do any one thing particularly well. One punchy heavy bolter isn't going to make it into a dangerous range threat, and in combat you basically just have the captain's profile plus the champion's profile. It just doesn't feel like it's going to compete with say things like a tooled up squad of Blade Guard veterans or something. If these rules are fully accurate and there isn't really much else to go for them, I just can't really see them being played competitively much. Just feels like it's a bit of a jack of all trades unit that doesn't really do any one role enormously well. They are really quite cool models though. I'm sure that a lot of people will be picking them up for looks alone. I'll certainly be interested to hear if you've got any ideas for making these very tough Marines work. Moving on, the next set of leaks are for the first company formation, the ones that seem to be building around Terminators plus the various flavours of veterans. From Games Workshop's previous reveals, we know that the core rule for the formation is a single turn of re-rolling wounds on Oath of Moment, so basically just one turn of getting old style Oath, kind of directly inferior to how Space Marines are at the moment, and you don't even get combat doctrines. Otherwise, Games Workshop's revealed stratagem for them was one command point to make a Veterans or Terminator unit -1 damage when they get charged, and there was an enhancement for a leader unit to get a 5+ feel no pain, plus once per game give that to his unit. That could be handy enough on any big veteran unit really. From the leaks this time we've got two stratagems and an enhancement. One of the stratagems looks interesting, the other one less so. First up for 1 CP we've got Heroes of the Chapter. This one's just a nice simple +1 to hit, either shooting or fighting. And apparently, as with the other T stratagem, you can only use it on any Veterans or Terminator units you have. In addition, as an added bonus, if you do use it on a depleted squad, you also get a +1 to wound as well if they're below half strength, though I guess you already are losing a lot of efficiency by targeting a depleted unit. This one seems really quite fun and pretty plausible. It sounds like it's essentially Fury of the First returning for 10th edition, a nice solid damage boost, usually +25% for the hit roll bit. That could easily be worth it for a tooled up Terminator squad's range or melee, or any big veteran unit really. I guess it wouldn't stack enormously well with new style Oath though, you might just have a bit of redundancy with buffing hit rolls there. Next up, the less interesting stratagem is called Terrifying Proficiency for 1 CP. This one's kind of sadly a Battle Shock one, and a fairly restrictive one at that. One Veterans unit or Terminator unit kills an enemy unit after charging, and then all other enemy units within 6 inches must take a Battle Shock test. If this does turn out to be accurate, it feels like it's a rule that was written for a different version of Battle Shock compared with the one that we actually wound up getting in 10th edition, as this is going to be near useless at the end of your own fight phase. Basically only relevant if it makes the difference of taking an enemy unit off an objective that you needed to capture for a secondary or something. Even if the enemy fails the Battle Shock test, which isn't guaranteed at all, they just immediately restore it in their own command phase, no questions asked. Finally, the rumoured enhancement is apparently the Imperium's Sword. Interesting to see that name come back from the 9th edition Codex. This time round apparently it's 25 points, and it gives the bearer a +1 attack for their melee weapons, and then a +1 attack for the whole unit's melee weapons once per game for one single phase. For that one, for 25 points it seems kind of mid to be. The +1 attack on the character is fine, but nothing really to write home about. I feel like the once per game +1 attack for their unit could be bigger, particularly when it applies to again something like a big Terminator squad or maxed out Blade Guard squad. There wasn't anything mentioned as to whether it has to apply to veterans for this one. I'd guess that it might be. Otherwise, I suppose that could open up some other options like using it on something like aggressors maybe. Overall, if these are indeed accurate, then the Heroes of the Chapter sounds like the most interesting one, a nice reliable damage buff for 1 CP. The Battle Shock one looks kind of awful, and the enhancement feels like something that you could spend some leftover points on, probably only really worth it if you're leading a pretty maximal unit. Next up, and a bit of a weird one if true, apparently the printed points for the Desolation squad cost is apparently the old one, the cost listed in the Codex being 120 points, the one that they were before Games Workshop gave them multiple rounds of nerfs, going up to 170 points, and then 200. If this does turn out to be right and these weren't just playtest rules or something like that, then really the takeaway for this one would be that the points in the Codex aren't going to be the current ones, and they're almost certainly going to do a digital update to them. As I just can't really see in the last balanced data slate them looking at Desolation squads and saying they were a problem at 170 points and then putting them all the way down to 120. I guess to an extent this might be expected. If the Space Marine Codex is basically going to be the same as the Tyranid book, it probably went to print before the 10th edition balance updates happened, and it seems highly likely that it would have been developed entirely in tandem. What happens with the Tyranids were that they got some slightly altered points changes, and then they were swiftly overwritten by the balanced data slate, and indeed the points section in the Codex specifically says that if you want to look at the current points of the army, it gives you a QR code to the Warhammer 40k download section, and very much underlines that the points in the Codex are a starting point, but they are likely to change as balance changes happen. The biggest question that I'd have for this is if they're going to let the Codex points stand, which I think would be unlikely if they're going for pre-nerf Desolation squads again. And if they are going to update the points, I wonder when they're actually going to do so, do some sort of update for the Munitor and Field Manual. Will be interesting to see if that comes along sometime in the pre-order window of the Space Marine Codex, or whether they do it slightly after release or something. For the Desolation squad specifically, I guess they might not need to be 200 points, I'd say. Not if Oath of Moment's been toned down so they can't re-roll the wound rolls with those Castellan launchers, and also they can't use the anti-infantry stratagem in Deathwatch anymore. Feels like 200 is a bit excessive. I still think they'd probably be a bit overpowered at 120 though. Maybe keeping them somewhere around the 160 to 170 mark might not be the worst. Sticking with points costs, which I will still say are probably unreliable based on that, but according to this leak, the rumoured points for the jump pack intercessors are supposedly very cheap indeed. Apparently they're going to be 90 points for a squad of 5, which is definitely less than I would have expected. Currently I believe that the 5-man assault squad is 115 points, and while I wouldn't have necessarily considered that to be one of the strongest Space Marine units out there, it wasn't unusable. I definitely seen Blood Angels using them a fair bit, plus one featured in that high placing Raven Guard list that I talked about earlier on the channel, with Kayvon Shrike winging around with them. I was guessing that these Assault Intercessors with jump packs would be a little bit less than the Assault Marines. It would kind of make sense if they're losing the Eviscerator with the extra damage to attacks, and also they have got a very slightly toned down mortal wound impact hit type rule. You can only inflict the mortal wounds on a 4+ with any models that actually make it into an engagement range, not just the entire unit full stop. If these do turn out to be 90 points, then I feel like they'll be a very competitive unit. They'll be cheap enough to jump around and do secondaries for one thing, never mind just being an annoying bully unit to get the charge on the enemy potentially from really quite a long way away, particularly if you've got advance and charge on the go, and try and kill any enemy lighter infantry units that are trying to take and hold objectives. As mentioned though, definitely take this one with more of a pinch of salt than usual. Even if the leak is entirely accurate, Games Workshop could countermand this with a digital points update. But I feel like this looks fairly positive for them, even if it's in the right sort of ballpark. Finally, we've got a few more details for the Firestorm Assault Force, the Salamanders / shooting mechanised infantry type army. I feel like out of the new detachments, this one was one of the more interesting ones, with some pretty cool stuff shown off so far. Games Workshop did give us some partial glimpses of other stratagems, but the main core reveals they did were that the ranged weapons all become assault, so this army just moves around the table very quickly while gunning you down, and you get +1 strength to your guns within 12 inches, maybe a bit more relevant against certain opponents compared with others. Otherwise, there's a 1 command point stratagem called Burning Vengeance, where your transport gets shot and then a unit that was inside it gets out and then shoots straight back. That one does sound fun. And then there was an enhancement for +3 to the bearer's melee weapon strength. I feel if that one's cheap enough, then that could be kind of useful to get Power Fists up from strength 8 to strength 11. As for the new leaks, if these ones do turn out to be accurate, it looks like they're borrowing pretty heavily from previous Salamanders stuff. First up, a pricey one for 2 CP for immolation protocols means that torrent weapons gain devastating wounds for this unit targeted. Supposedly this one's a battle tactic, so it's one that captains could use, probably going to be most relevant on a captain leading around a big squad of aggressors I guess, but anything with a whole bunch of torrent would work quite well. If you had say a 10-man Infernus squad jumping out of a drop pod, then that would average around about 6 devastating wounds from all the hits that they get. And on the other hand, if you had a full max Flamestorm aggressor type squad, then you'd average around about 8 devastating wounds for that. That's if you fish for them maximally with the twin linked rolling. Both of those seem at least fairly scary, should be taking a big chunk out of whatever you threatened, and could be interesting if Volcanistan remains unchanged. He could allow some full reroll wound rolls for Pyroblasters now they can't get it from Oath. If his rule remains the same, then that could allow some fishing for 6s there, and that would make them a far better user of the stratagem compared with the aggressors. Quite a nice one if so, really quite costly at 2 CP, but feels very Salamanders, white hot flamers melting all sorts of things they probably shouldn't normally. The other one's a nice simple one command point for Crucible of Battle, and this is one that's been iconic to Salamanders for a while now. This time it targets any one Astartes infantry unit, so no good for bikes or dreadnoughts or anything, but they get a +1 to wound when they're shooting or fighting a unit. This one's nice, cheap and easy to use. Should be nice if you've got any mid-strength weapons or lower strength weapons trying to punch up a bit. If you had Hellblasters, Multi-Melters or Blade Guard wounding on 5s or something, then that would have some really big effect on those powerful weapons. In general, I'd probably argue that +1 to wound is usually going to be better than +1 to hit, though it does depend on the circumstances. The leak didn't say whether this one was a battle tactic or not. Again, it could be a real staple one if it is a battle tactic, and you can just use this time and again with your captains. Finally, we've got one leaked enhancement that's apparently called Forged in Battle for 15 points, and this one sounds like an interesting leadership type one, which means that while your character is leading a unit, you can change one hit roll a turn and a saving throw a turn to an automatic 6. You'd be able to do that after rolling. The hit roll thing is nice enough. I guess it would mean that your unit would just be a little bit more reliable than normal. It's even more of a powerful rule compared with, say, a Master Artisan's type rule that allows you to re-roll the hit roll, as that basically means that you get an automatic 6, and it could be useful for lethal and sustained hits too. The automatic 6 save thing seems pretty excellent as well. That would basically guarantee you from going from one slain marine to a living marine, and even that just on its own is absolutely worth the 15 points. If that ever does save you against a mid or high damage attack, then it's already paid for itself back, never mind if you get to use it on multiple turns. If this one is right, and indeed it is 15 points, then it seems basically auto-include to me. If you've got a dangerous squad and a character leading them, then this one just looks like it's going to add a decent amount of added value, and would be well worth trying to find a place for it. If there aren't some even better ones out there in the detachment, I guess we should be having 2 more at some stage. Overall though, I do feel like this Firestorm Assault Force is shaping up into being a really interesting formation. Interesting transport tricks from the Burning Vengeance stratagem, a good core rule with some fast mobility while still putting out a lot of firepower. Probably well worth having one dangerous aggressor squad to activate immolation protocols on. Crucible of Battle's great for 1 CP, and that Forged in Battle enhancement seems like one of the most easy value includes out of quite a lot of them in 40k. Seems good, it will be fun to see the rest. I think that one of the other stratagems that we saw partially from Games Workshop was something to do with re-embarking and transports. In any case, let me know what you make of the leaks. If these do turn out to be right, then what do you make of the Command Squad, the Jump Intercessors, the First Company, and the Salamanders? I feel like if these are accurate, probably the Jump Intercessors and the Firestorm Assault Force seem to be the biggest winners out of these. Maybe less exciting stuff for the Company Heroes and the First Company. In any case, really looking forward to covering the Space Marine Codex in full once we get it. I'll certainly be trying to make a full Codex review here on the channel, and we'll definitely look forward to that. Otherwise, I'll definitely cover any more previews or leaks that we get either from Games Workshop or elsewhere. Finally, if you've enjoyed the video and you'd like to help keep them coming, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked down in the video description below. The channel's Patreon backers are what allow me to keep on making videos as my main thing. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.